Every morning at precisely 7, the same sound tore through the Wiltshire mist, a chorus of screams rising from the eastern wing of Harrington Hall. It wasn't the usual chaos of children waking up. It was sharper, more desperate, echoing off the marble floors and crystal chandeliers like the cry of a wounded animal. 7 voices, distinct yet inseparable, belonging to the 7 children of Sir Edmund Harrington, one of Britain's wealthiest, loneliest men. The housekeeper would flinch. The maids whispered prayers. Even the gardeners outside the gate knew what those cries meant. Another nanny gone. In the 3 years since Lady Margaret Harrington had died giving birth to her long-awaited septuplets, 24 nannies had come and gone. Some fled in tears, some in fear. None stayed. The children, born of science and sorrow, had become a living legend in the English press. The 7 storms of Wiltshire, the tabloids called them. The ungovernable heirs to an empire built on iron and ice. Sir Edmund had withdrawn behind his office doors, a widower whose fortune grew as his family crumbled. He had stopped speaking of love or birthdays or bedtime stories. The staff had learned never to mention Lady Margaret's name, until that grey November morning when a cab stopped at the estate's iron gate. The driver, wet from the drizzle, opened the door for a woman in her late 20s. She wore a beige coat too thin for the weather and carried a scuffed brown suitcase. Her shoes were polished but old, her expression calm, almost serene. The butler frowned when she reached the door. "You're here for the position, miss?" "Whitmore. Eleanor Whitmore," she replied softly. He hesitated. "You do realize most don't last past breakfast?" She smiled faintly. "I don't count hours. I count hearts." There was something in her voice, a quiet steadiness that made even the cynical old man pause. He led her inside. The air smelled of polish and loneliness. Upstairs, Sir Edmund watched the security feed. Another one, he thought. Poor soul. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, though it was barely 8 o'clock. "She'll be gone by noon," he muttered. But as the rain softened outside, something within the house shifted. Something imperceptible but real, like the first stir of warmth after a long winter. The east wing looked like the aftermath of a small war. Expensive toys lay in ruins, wallpaper scarred with crayons, tiny chairs overturned. A porcelain lamp lay shattered in the corner. And at the center of it all, 7 children, fair-haired and wild-eyed, the untamed heirs of Harrington Hall. A small boy hurled a ball against the wall with a fury far beyond his years. Another tore pages from a picture book, screaming at no one in particular. A girl shoved her sister, who screamed back with equal rage. The air buzzed with defiance. Eleanor stood quietly in the doorway. Her calmness was almost strange, out of place in that hurricane of noise. She didn't bark orders or rush into comfort. She simply observed, head slightly tilted like someone listening for a distant sound only she could hear. "You're very loud," she said at last. Her voice was low, even. Not a reprimand, but a statement of fact. The children froze, startled. They were used to commands, shouts, bribes, never calm acknowledgement. "I'm not here to order you," she continued. "I only want to know which one of you can draw." The words hung in the air, a pause. Then a small hand rose, a girl with pale eyes and trembling fingers. "I can," she whispered. "Perfect," said Eleanor, with a soft smile. "Then we'll start with you." She set her suitcase down and opened it. Inside was a box of short, worn, colored pencils and a stack of plain paper. She sat cross-legged on the carpet and began to draw. A small cottage, a tree, a bed with a pillow. One by one, curiosity replaced chaos. The children crept closer, peering over her shoulder. "Can I have the blue?" asked one. Only if you share it, she said. No scolding, no shouting, only gentle rules. From the upper floor, Sir Edmund watched on the monitors. He'd seen tantrums, broken vases, emergency exits, but never this. He leaned closer. His hand hovered over the panic button the estate used when a nanny needed rescuing, but there was no need. The children sat still, quiet, drawing. The noise had dissolved. By the time evening came, the mansion, for the first time in years, fell into peace, and as the housekeeper passed the door of the nursery, she froze. Inside, 7 children slept, heads against soft pillows, while a woman in a beige coat hummed a lullaby that seemed older than words. By the end of the week, something unimaginable had happened. The Harrington children began to speak. Not scream, not bite. Speak. Please. Thank you. Small words, but miracles nonetheless. Each evening, Eleanor sang the same lullaby. No one recognized the tune. It was slow, almost mournful, the kind of melody that seemed to remember pain. Sir Edmund listened from his study, whiskey untouched, haunted by the sound of something human returning to his home. On the 7th night, he finally went to the nursery. Eleanor was folding blankets, quiet as snow. "How have you done it?" he asked. "I've hired experts from Oxford, Edinburgh, even Zurich. None lasted longer than a day. You've made them gentle." "I didn't make them anything," she said softly. "I listened." Her eyes lowered to the old suitcase by her chair. From its side pocket slipped a small, worn photograph. Edmund stooped and picked it up before she could. A boy, perhaps 4 or 5, fair hair, a missing tooth, the same shade of blue in his eyes as the 7 little ones sleeping nearby. "Your son?" he asked. She hesitated. "My brother." Her fingers reached for the picture tenderly. He needed someone to listen to. She took it back and slid it into the suitcase, closing the lid with care. That night, unable to rest, Edmund wandered into the children's room. The air smelled faintly of crayons and warm milk. On the carpet lay a drawing, a cradle, a handful of tears, and beside it, in shaky, childlike letters, "He still cries here." He stood there for a long time under the nightlight's soft glow, his throat tightening. For the first time since the funeral, he whispered his late wife's name aloud. In the silence that followed, he realized that the woman in the beige coat hadn't just calmed his children. She had awakened something in him that had been buried under grief and guilt. Sunday mornings were always Edmund's least favorite. The house was too quiet, like a cathedral after service, but this one was different. When he descended to the breakfast room, he heard laughter, soft, uncertain, but real. He followed the sound to the drawing room. There, Eleanor sat cross-legged on the carpet, holding a teddy bear whose fur was worn thin. Around her, the 7 children formed a perfect circle. "Today," she said, "we'll talk about feelings, but not the loud ones." The children stared at her, puzzled. Feelings had always come with noise. She smiled. "If you could name what's inside you right now, what would you call it?" A boy muttered, "Angry?" "Good. What color is angry?" "Red." "Then draw it." They reached for crayons. Another child spoke. "I miss Mum." "What color is that?" Eleanor asked softly. "Blue," whispered the little girl. Eleanor nodded. "Then make it as blue as you need." From the doorway, Edmund watched silently. His throat tightened. No therapist had ever managed what this woman was doing, giving grief a shape, giving silence a color. "Would you like to join our circle, sir?" she asked without looking back. He froze. I don't know how." She patted the rug beside her. "Then sit and begin with one word." He sat down, stiff and awkward among the crayons. The children looked at him as though seeing him for the first time. After a long pause, he said quietly, "Fear." "Fear of what, Papa?" asked one boy. He swallowed hard. "Of not knowing how to be your father." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the youngest child placed a red crayon into his hand. "You can borrow mine," she said. It broke something in him, gently, like thawing ice. That evening, as Eleanor hummed the lullaby once more, Edmund stood outside the nursery door. He realized he had never once said good night to his own children. So he whispered it, awkwardly, softly, through the door. They didn't answer. But he heard them breathing evenly, and that was enough. By the second month, the house no longer felt cursed. Sunlight touched the walls differently, as if daring to enter again. The children drew pictures of gardens instead of storms. They had even begun to tease their father, calling him Sir Daddy. But Edmund's curiosity about the new nanny had turned to quiet obsession. Who was she, really? Where had she come from? Her calm wasn't ordinary. It was the kind born from surviving something. He called his butler one evening. "Find everything you can about Miss Whitmore. Background, family, history, all of it." The report arrived 2 days later, placed neatly upon his desk. He hesitated before opening it, as though fearing what he might find. Eleanor Whitmore, age 29. Born in Northumberland. Orphaned at 15. Raised by her grandmother until the woman's death. One younger brother, Eli Whitmore, deceased. Died aged 3 in a fall down the stairs of a care home. Official cause, accident. Case closed for lack of evidence. Edmund closed the folder slowly, his chest tightening. The boy in the photo, that boy. He poured himself a drink and didn't touch it. That night he dreamt of his wife, Margaret, standing by the nursery window, holding a child he could never reach. When he awoke, dawn light filtered through the curtains like forgiveness. He understood then. Eleanor hadn't come to save his children. She had come to rewrite a grief that had never been given words. Downstairs, the old brown suitcase sat by her chair, always closed. He found himself staring at it more often, wondering what ghosts it carried. No one in the house dared to touch Eleanor's suitcase. Even the children, in all their curiosity, knew it was sacred ground. "What's in there, Nanny?" asked little Amelia one afternoon. "Memories," Eleanor answered, smiling faintly. "Some beautiful, some that still ache." The children nodded as if they understood, but Edmund's curiosity was different. It wasn't childish. It was a pull, deep and inexplicable. He longed to understand the sadness behind her calm. One evening he found her sitting in the garden. The trees were shedding gold. The air smelled of rain and earth. "You've changed this place," he said. "It's quieter now, but not empty. Quieter like peace." She smiled. "Peace isn't the absence of noise, sir. It's the courage to sit with it." He studied her face. "You speak like someone who's known loss. And you listen like someone who's learning how," she replied. He laughed softly, the first true laugh in years. But behind it lingered something unspoken, something both of them recognized and refused to name. That night, as the house slept, Eleanor opened her suitcase in secret. Inside lay a small wooden box wrapped in an old handkerchief. She lifted the lid. Letters, faded and folded, addressed to Eli Whitmore. Crayon drawings, a scrap of a child's shirt, and a small white teddy bear missing one eye. Her fingers trembled as she touched them. "I kept my promise, Eli," she whispered. "I learned to listen." Tears slipped silently down her cheeks, but they weren't the tears of despair. They were the slow, cleansing kind that wash away years of silence. At that same hour, Edmund stood in the hallway, unsure why he'd woken. He passed the nursery door and paused, hearing her lullaby, that same haunting tune. Only this time, he heard a second voice inside it, something like goodbye. Winter settled over Wiltshire like a sigh. The air turned sharp, the fields pale with frost. Inside the manor, life moved in a gentler rhythm, baking pies, reading stories, laughter spilling down the stairs. One morning, as the first snow fell, a letter arrived addressed to Eleanor Whitmore. The handwriting was unfamiliar. She read it by the window. Her eyes glistened, though her lips curved in a small, bittersweet smile. It was from the York Children's Refuge, newly reopened. The director, a woman who had once worked at the same care home where Eli died, wrote, "We remember your heart. If you're ready, we'd like you to lead the new home, to give other children what you once tried to give him." Eleanor folded the letter quietly. She knew what it meant, not escape, but purpose. That afternoon, she found Edmund in the library. The fire burned low, the air thick with the scent of old leather and pine. "I've been offered a position in York," she said. He looked up slowly. "You're leaving?" "I think I'm being asked to begin again." He was silent for a long time. Finally he said, "You've rebuilt this house, Eleanor. You've rebuilt me. If you must go, go knowing that you've done more good than you'll ever be thanked for." When she returned to her room that night, she found a box on her bed. Inside lay her old suitcase, restored, polished, with gold initials, EW beneath it, a note in Edmund's handwriting. "So you may take only what you choose, the rest will stay here, in us." She pressed the letter to her heart, then began writing 7 small notes, one for each child. In each, a drawing, a word of encouragement, a promise. You are seen, you are loved. Eleanor left quietly, just before sunrise. The world was still blue with mist. She kissed each sleeping forehead, whispered a blessing, and walked through the great oak doors of Harrington Hall without looking back. The butler watched from the window, eyes misty. "First one who didn't run," he murmured. She simply went home. Weeks passed. At the Children's Refuge in York, Eleanor filled her days with small hands and big feelings. She taught through colors and stories, using her old suitcase as a treasure chest of hope. Her office was small, bright, filled with laughter. Above her desk hung a framed drawing, 7 children sitting around a woman on the floor, all smiling. At the bottom, in a child's uneven handwriting, one word: family. On a rainy afternoon in February, a knock sounded at her door. She opened it and froze. Sir Edmund stood there, older somehow, softer around the eyes. Behind him, 7 familiar faces peeked through the doorway, cheeks flushed, hands full of new drawings. "We wanted to see you," said little Amelia, her voice trembling with excitement. Eleanor knelt as they rushed into her arms, laughter, tears, crayons spilling everywhere. A chaos that felt holy. Edmund smiled faintly. "They insisted." "I can see that," she laughed through tears. "And you?" He met her gaze. "I wanted to thank you. Properly." He handed her a folded paper. It was a drawing, Her, the children, and himself, all beneath a large tree. Across the top, written carefully in a child's scrawl, "We are not storms anymore." Eleanor pressed the paper to her chest, overwhelmed. "You never were," she whispered. "You just needed someone to listen." Outside, rain washed the courtyard clean. The children ran through puddles laughing as Edmund and Eleanor watched from the doorway. Two souls who had finally made peace with what could never be undone. And in that quiet she realized something profound. Healing doesn't erase what's broken. It teaches the heart to live beside it. She looked at him, smiled softly and said, "You found your voice, Edmund." He nodded. "You gave it back to me." Then the sound of children's laughter rose like music, filling the room, the kind that no storm could silence again. And reflective close and CTA. If you believe kindness heals more than time ever could, share this story, leave a comment, and subscribe for more tales that remind us what it means to be human.